Hello, I'm Dave, and this is Martin. We're going to be talking to you from Writer Talk on TWF, and today we're going to talk about a very close subject to both our hearts: Batman.
I like Batman, it's fair to say. Dave would maybe marry it and have many, many little Batman children with it, with the subject. Yeah, yes. Dave likes Batman a lot.
Dave is going to give you many examples of how much he likes Batman.
Telltale game is a very good one.
There's also the other Dark Knight trilogy in the back, but I don't like them as much as I like those ones.
See, thing is, I knew how much you like Batman when we recorded the Other Worlds podcasts with you, Helen, and what have you. You and Helen both like Harry Potter, so I went and bought some coasters so that because we always had drinks in front of us, didn't we? And I went and bought coasters. There were the Harry Potter houses on the coasters, and then there was a Joker one because we had to have something Batman because Dave was here. Now that's something that nobody could have ever seen, but that's the extent to which I thought you might have appreciated it.
It was just for me.
Yes. Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I think in fairness, the only other thing you could argue that I love more than Batman, and real people, is Star Wars. So it's there's a lightsaber out of shot, which I won't get up and get, but I am very much a fan of both Batman and Star Wars.
So when we
for today,
when we decided to redo or to do some more of these podcasts, to just be a couple of writers talking about writerly things, when we had discussions about this, we had a few meetings about this, and we worked out what we were going to talk about. Quite high, if not at the top of the list, ended up Dave's choice of Batman. So we're going to freeform this a bit. Oh, I'm sure you don't. But for those who are listening and watching us, we are going to freeform this. We did sort of loosely talk about like the different adaptations of Batman and stuff like that. And
yeah,
where do you want to go first with this, Dave?
Well, I think the first thing we should address is, unfortunately, the most recent adaptation of Batman, because I do have opinions, and then we'll just work up to the better stuff later.
Okay.
Let's get the nasty stuff out of the way, because we both have rightly disagreements with places that have gone with the most recent adaptation of Batman. We are, of course, talking for people in the future, the Snyderverse, as it's so called, Batman vs. Superman, Batfleck.
Yeah.
I have no great issue with Batman being played by Ben Affleck, by the way, but I'll get to that. So that's what we're talking about. And it is possibly the worst interpretation of Batman and his universe I have ever seen.
Okay, so before we continue with that, though, can I just point out, Batman has withstood an awful lot in terms of adaptation, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we have had, Adam West Batman, we've had Nolan Batman, we've had, we've had so many different iterations of Batman, it's not even funny. We've had Lego Batman,
which is spectacular,
and we've had non-official versions of Batman too. Batman withstands a heck of a lot of different interpretations of as a character. The interpretation of Batman has been huge and wide. So, what bothers you so much about the Snyder version?
I think it's not so much for Snyder version itself. I think what it is, it's taken. I have a what's the term when you're testing something? It's you. If you can apply this to it, this is how you. I'm trying to think of a term. It's going to bother me.
Experiment.
No.
Theory. No. Hypothesis.
No. As in, there's an actual test that proves something is it something. It's got a specific name.
Oh, right. Okay.
Me the second we finish recording, and we'll put it in the description. It's how you can tell if your interpretation of Batman is in fact Batman.
Okay.
And not just punish you with a bat gimmick.
Right.
the way that you can do it is, can you see this Batman, not Bruce Wayne, Batman, when he's in the cowl and all the get-up, comforting a crying child successfully?
Okay.
If you cannot see him doing it, that is not Batman. I cannot see Batfleck in all the gear comforting a small child. I can see Bruce Wayne doing it because they show us him doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So he cares. Yes, he does. He also murders an immigrant.
So to
Sorry,
you,
I hate it. I hate it.
so to you, the character of Batman is more than just a guy who dresses up with vaguely bat-themed stuff and has an army of loads of stuff at his disposal.
Pretty much. To me, the I know what they're going for in that movie. They're going for the idea that he's some kind of cryptid, which is fine. It works, but not when Batman's been around for that point in that movie's universe. He's been around long enough to have at least one Robin who dies.
Yeah.
He is a veteran. He's a man in the middle of his age, middle aged, allegedly. But he's been at it for a long time, and they still don't know who he is. There's a signal on the top of the flipping police station, and they still are treating him like he's not real. It's just a lot of. It's very much. It comes from my personal opinion on Zack Snyder's approach to comic books. He came to it as an adult. He came to comics as an adult, and his interpretation, his enjoyment of those comics is very clearly from an adult perspective. This is not to say Zack Snyder isn't a good filmmaker. He is. That's why he messed up so badly, because only talent can bring out that much wrong.
Okay. So hang on a sec. If part of your problem then is that if part of your theory is about how Zack Snyder came to this as an adult, what would separate? What's different about the Batman you see in, for example, The Killing Joke, which, let's be clear, is a comic book, very, very definitely designed at the over-18s market?
Oh, decidedly.
Is that version of Batman still Batman in your interpretation of that?
I get your point. Yes, because the difference is Batman in The Killing Joke is still a character. He's still there as a person. It's much more of an in-depth character study. There is more to him. There's nuance to this Batman, and it's grim and it's a dark story. I would also argue, much as Alan Moore himself has said, it doesn't hold up. It's not the most Batman-y of Batman stories, but he's still noticeably a Batman more than I would say the Batman in Batman and versus Superman is, because there's more nuance to him. You see, he is a detective. He's a man. You see more of a person, and yes, you see a person in Ben Affleck's portrayal of him, but it's paper thin. The argument falls apart. The argument of that Batman has, this is why we're going to keep doing this, and it's more. I keep going back to it. It's the nuance. There is no nuance to Batman in Batman vs Superman to me. It's just I'm angry. I'm going to punch you now because all the good men turn bad. How many stayed that way? I'm tired of the edginess.
Because, well, I mean, let's be honest. This edginess seems to have come from a world in which the writers and the developers,
edginess.
Okay,
I wouldn't call it. It's not that edgy. It's grimdark, done really badly.
Well, either way, it's all drawn from this apparent desire by the people in charge of these characters to create something which is, in very, very loose terms, more realistic. Yes.
Well, that's the thing, though. They say they're going for realism. They don't mean realism. They mean consequence. And they go tonto with it. It's ridiculous. Because here's the thing. You want to talk about realism in Batman? They did it already. It's the Nolan trilogy. And I'll be honest with you, when you're talking about a man who runs around in basically Batman pajamas You know,
Yeah.
the latex, they're all lovely and all that. They're very, very swish. The armor is very impressive. He's running around in a costume, and you're going, well, what if this was more realistic? Then he'd be
Yeah.
dead.
Well,
Make believe.
so on this, it's worth saying, I dredged up, thinking ahead of this, I dredged up this article. I don't know whether you've seen it. I'm going to show you it, and tell me if you have seen it. Let's see about this. There we go. The Scientific American. Dark Knight Shift, why Batman could exist but not for long. I don't know whether you've read this.
I haven't read it and I haven't seen it, but I suspect I probably agree with it.
So there is a section in this. It's written. It's really quite cool, but it's written, and it basically states that Batman could not survive for more than 3 years. There we are.
Okay.
So if we look here, how long would Bruce Wayne have to train to become Batman? Blah, blah, blah. Some say 5 years, but 3 to 5 years. I would benchmark that at 10 to 12 years is how long Batman would have to spend, or the person would have to spend training. Some people have said 15 to 18 years, blah, blah, blah. And then it gets into how he would have to survive, how long things would go, how much rest he'd have to get, all of this kind of stuff. But it basically comes down to, yes, you could have Batman survive, not without concussion, it's worth saying.
Yeah.
And then he comes down, and ultimately he ends up saying in this article that Batman could only really survive for about 3 to 5 years before he is dead. Not severely injured, dead.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's one of the I think this is one of the big issues when you have someone who's approaching comics with an adult mind frame. Now, okay, you don't have to be immature about it. You don't have to pander. You don't have to go, oh no, it's just for kids. Yes, it is just for kids. It's not just for kids, obviously, but it's not just for kids anymore. No, it's not. But as a very well made point made by Bob Chipman on his, I think it's either on Big Picture or something to do with The Escapist or something along those lines. One of those many platforms he's on. It's very good. No, it's not just for kids, but the predominant audience for any comic book character in its first initial run is very much for children. And sometimes you need to not run away from that quite so much because it looks a little bit more like a less of a thing about the property, because multiple iterations of Batman have very much been aimed at a younger audience and are sometimes the best version of its.
I mean, do you really still think that's true, though? I mean, like, we live in a world where it's undeniable that there is a massive market now of adult age people who are reading comics. It would surely be a financial and economic mistake to underestimate that. There is a comic series called God is Dead, and I forget who that's by, and I should have picked it up beforehand as a prop, but God is Dead is an adult themed thing. There's another series of comics, Think Tank. There's another series of comics, The Massive. They are all very adult aimed. They are not aimed at they're not necessarily aimed at children or even young adult. They're clearly aimed at an older audience. So
that's fair.
To say that most new characters are designed for a younger audience, I would take issue with that, especially now.
Okay, fair enough. I don't think if I said new, I misspoke, because I'm talking about our classic superheroes.
Okay.
I'm talking about Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman. Well, Wonder Woman's we could argue who Wonder Woman was made for, going by her creators, I should say.
But we are still talking about a time when comic code existed and when there were standards. You could only have X amount of. So, I mean, for those who don't know what the comic code is or don't know the history of sort of almost censorship, I suppose, in comics, do you want to touch on that a sec?
Yeah, you probably know a bit more about it than I do, because my understanding of the comics code was that basically you couldn't portray certain things. You couldn't certain storylines were not allowed because they would break the comics code and were deemed unsuitable. It's basically, from my understanding, the comics code is the same as the parental advisory sticker on some CDs, only a lot more extreme.
I mean, so the Comic Code and the Comic Code Authority works a lot more like the British Advertising Standards Authority.
Oh, right.
So in the UK, there are some laws about what can and can't be advertised. For example, it is illegal, end of story illegal, to advertise a cure for cancer. End of story.
Really?
Yes. So anybody who says that this product will cure cancer or will treat cancer or will do anything to do with it, that advert breaks the law. It is as clean cut as that. There is no never mind in that. That is illegal, and that will get you into a heck of a lot of trouble. It's why when Noel Edmonds said, I used this product and this product cured my cancer, yeah, the company very, very quickly stepped away from Noel Edmonds and said, no, we don't, we don't support this.
Yeah,
There's a video.
that's him, not us.
Yeah, there's a video by an educational YouTuber called Tom Scott that goes into this in more detail. But basically, for every other type of advertising, there's very little regulation. There's very little law.
Yeah.
And what happened was the advertising industry got together and said, look, if we create the Advertising Standards Authority, then the government won't regulate what we do. The government won't legislate. They won't write laws. We will be able to decide what is and what isn't allowed. So it's a self-regulating industry. And the Comics Code Authority was somewhat like that, as best as I can understand. It was set up in America and designed so that people publishing with that symbol or under that authority's guidelines could basically say to the government, look, don't censor us, don't regulate us, don't do this, and we will make sure that everybody falls in line. We as the industry will take on that responsibility instead of the government having to regulate. Because the fear is regulation gives way to censorship, gives way to problems.
What sort? Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as I understand it, the Comics Code Authority, or the Comics Code, was basically this list of rules that publishers didn't have to sign up to.
Yeah.
But did because they feared government censorship or government regulation. It kind of fell out of popularity, and there are articles all over the web if people are really interested in Comics Code, but there were things in that Comics Code. Let me find if I can find. Let me see. So some of the old. One of the real key ones here is if the crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity. So in the Comics Code, crime had to be seen as something that was bad. Had to be sordid and unpleasant. You could show a crime, but you had to show it being sordid and unpleasant.
To be a bad thing. Yeah.
Whereas today we've got more complex characters who you might have a thief who has a heart of gold. You might, let's be honest, Deadpool wouldn't fit into the Comics Code.
No, but also I suspect neither would John Constantine.
No.
But to keep us on track, because we will go.
Yes.
But my big issue with the Snyderverse Batman is it's a lot of grim, and there's nothing wrong with going grim and going dark. There are many dark Batman properties because the universe lends itself to darkness. It does. Well, it really does. It's the gleeful nastiness that I think takes away from it, because this Batman it actually brings us back to the Comics Code, because obviously that will be why the heroes never kill.
I don't know whether killing was on there, but
I wouldn't be surprised. It's like if all crime is bad, murder is a really bad one. But you get me point. Batman does not kill, even when he probably in certain circumstances should. Joker, for example. But he doesn't. And I cannot envision Batman from Batman vs Superman having that rule. He's flaunting it. He's going to kill Superman. But here's the thing. We did not see the build. That means nothing to us as an audience, because as far as we're concerned, this Batman has never shown us that he's got any issue with killing his enemies.
Well, and let's be clear here. We don't actually need necessarily a build. We, at the very least, however, do need a plant and payoff. So
and we've got no evidence of that.
No, and that's some of the issues. I take issue with, for example, Doctor Who, and I know this strays into a different subject, but Doctor Who during Stephen Moffat's era basically went, "Oh, we've killed Rory. What a shame. He's gone forever." And he's alive again. And then they did it again, and he's alive again. And when you do that, what you set up is the fact that when you kill somebody, it doesn't really matter.
Means
You
nothing.
contrast that with something like there's a TV show, an American TV show called The Rookie. In the first season, they killed off the character of the police chief, the police captain, and they have this rookie sitting there having seen this police captain be shot and killed. Like, you do that and you kill off a main character in that way in the middle of a season when nobody's expecting it, nobody's safe, or at least that's how the audience will feel. Of course, we're dealing with fantasy and sci-fi somewhat, so the rules are a bit more blurred there, but things need to be earned, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And I think the same applies to whatever property you're looking at.
Yeah. Sorry, bear with me, Esther. But that's the issue with me, is the Batman in Batman vs Superman has got no build to him. Unless you take the rest of what we know of Batman in our osmosis, through osmosis, through our culture, because he's a big symbol in our culture. Case in point, I have pajamas with his flipping symbol on it, and I am not alone in this situation. But then tell us, oh, but this isn't your old Batman. This isn't your granddad's Batman. Then why does any of this matter? But I am aware that we've gone on about what we don't like. What I don't like.
Yeah,
I will rant for an hour. But
it's worth saying. I mean, we are writers. We can't help but analyze certain things in order to understand how they work. If we want our writing to be better, we have to analyze things to work out what makes them tick. That's often why we end up talking about these things, and being clear about what we don't like or what we don't think works will be applied to our own work. So something like, I mean, and you know, you're talking about how, in all honesty, in the Snyderverse, you would expect to see that Batman kill. Well, we saw this with Superman. One of the big unwritten rules of Superman is Superman doesn't kill people. He gets them to. He hands them over to the justice system. The justice system takes care of them from there. That is what he does. That is the American way, kind of thing.
Yeah, and if nothing else, if prison cannot hold them in America, like with Zod, because that's always but this isn't a human. This is another Kryptonian. Yeah, Zod goes to the Phantom Zone.
Yes,
which is a prison, which is a judicial system. Granted, it's very draconian how they go about it, and that's something else you could talk about. But he doesn't kill him.
No, but in fairness, I think a lot of the furore around that was that is something subconsciously people understand. Batman and Superman are two characters who don't really kill people. The symbol you have on your shirt is a symbol that a lot of people will instinctively know what that means, what that is. You pick up things by osmosis just through living in society. That's what pop culture becomes. But it's worth saying, though, that a lot of this will not kill, a lot of this good triumphing over evil stuff, it is and this is why I brought up the comics code, because yes, okay, that was there. From what I understand as well, it wasn't just about the regulation, but it also meant that advertisers would advertise in the comics as long as the Comic Code Authority symbol was there. And the only reason the Comic Code sort of disappeared was because advertisers went, well, we don't really care whether that's there or not, because people don't care about this old-fashioned set of rules. Again, I have an only tangential understanding of this, so if I've misinterpreted, apologies to anybody who knows better. But in a world where that doesn't exist, in a world where we don't see comic books and we don't see, you know, we're still going to see. I watched the Harley Quinn animated thing that was on Channel 4 last night.
Yeah.
There were still adverts in front of that show. You know, we're not living in a world where adult themes are shied away from. We still see advertising appear in front of content that advertisers might not like to be associated with. Nevertheless, that is what happens. Now, as a tangent to that, it's worth saying America is very different. In the UK, we have an expectation. We have an expectation that if you want to advertise on a TV channel, you don't get a say. You might get a say in your time slot, but that's all you get a say in. You know, you don't get to dictate editorial policy. You don't get to dictate that, well, I don't want my stuff associated with this TV program. Sorry, that's not what you get. In America, it's a little different. In America, and we see this with YouTube. YouTube advertiser revenue went down because there were advertisers in America who went, well, hang on, we don't want to be associated with these themes because they're used to dictating that. But in a world that is increasingly pushing against that idea that advertisers should say what content they're associated with, in a world that pushes against that, is there not room for those darker subjects to be explored? Is there not room for a Batman or a Superman who can kill?
Definitely is. Well, I mean, there's actually a really good example of this is there are more than enough room for dark themes in comic book stories. It's very doable. Hell, the Batman, Telltale game, if you notice very carefully, is aimed at an adult audience. Now, you and I have both played this game.
Yeah.
Is it unfair of me to say that that game has a much more accurate adaptation of Batman as a character than the Snyderverse movies?
I mean, accurate through whose lens? I mean, traditionally with adaptation, and this is where I struggle with franchises kind of like Batman and looking at it as an adaptation. Traditionally, in adaptation, you're talking about one, maybe a few sources.
Yeah.
There is no definite. So if I'm going to adapt, for example, picking at random Jane Eyre, which is a novel I have adapted.
Yeah.
If I'm adapting Jane Eyre, there is one definitive source for Jane Eyre that I go to, and that is it. If I was going, however, to adapt Doctor Who, which version do I choose?
Fair point.
And Batman's not like that. Batman is more like Doctor Who than it is like Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre, the adaptation principles are all the same. You're choosing what parts of the source material you're going to take and what parts you're going to modify, because those are the decisions the person, the adapter, makes. You have to make judgment calls. You have to decide what message you want to send. When I adapted Treasure Island, I chose to cut out an awful lot because what was important to me, and this is where it comes into it, what was important to me was the relationship between Jim and Long John Silver. That's the key, in my opinion, to Treasure Island.
Yeah.
So I chose, with my adaptation of Treasure Island, to focus in on just those moments. What moments build the trust between Jim Hawkins and Long John? What moments do we see who Long John really is while Jim doesn't? How do we see Jim progressing as a human being in order to realize that Long John isn't the person he thought it is? And how do we see the betrayal? And more importantly, how do we see what Jim's decision was when he lets Long John go?
Yeah.
These are all key important moments, and these moments guide the decision of how the adaptation is going to be created.
Yeah.
Now, if I was going to take on Batman, where's the definitive source that I would go to for that? For Treasure Island, I have one. I have one definitive source. If I'm in doubt, I go to the novel written by Robert Louis Stevenson. That is my starting point. That is the Bible, essentially. That is the bit that I will always have to come back to. That said, I still went to look at Muppets Treasure Island. I still went to look at other versions of Treasure Island and worked out what did they do, what worked well for me. But with Batman, there's no definitive source. So if you're talking about adaptation, there's even more judgment calls, surely.
I think it's when it comes to such big characters in our collective zeitgeist, shall we say, there are things you can pull from. Like we have said it already. Batman, for a start, as a general rule, does not kill. Now, I would not be against the idea of Batman killing in a story, as long as it was built to. But that's just me. As a general rule, there are certain things about some characters that are as big as, say, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, the Doctor. I would actually argue there are set cast iron rules for the Doctor, but just get ignored. And characters like those. Like, I mean, if I asked you to name 3 attributes about Batman, it'd probably be quite similar to most other people's.
Genius, skilled at fighting, and a crap load of money.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, You can boil it down to those. That is who Batman is.
I think that's fair. Another one that a lot of people would throw out would be Justice.
See, I would associate justice more with Superman, but mainly because with Superman you have that truth, justice, American way.
And I wouldn't, but that's a different conversation to have.
Yes, quite probably.
It takes us somewhere very interesting, but with nothing to do with Batman.
But if we're talking with Batman, we have a couple of taglines like that we can rely on. We have Caped Crusader. Yep. We have World's Greatest Detective. There may be more, but those are the only two I know.
Greatest Detective, Caped Crusader, The Dark Knight.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah, those are the big ones. But no, but that's the thing though. On at the with the sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I'm trying to recapture it because
well, I mean, with things like that, with things like Dark Knight, with Caped Crusader, we have inbuilt understandings, don't we? So a Crusader Knight, they're very, very similar concepts. They are essentially people who are doing good. We had a if we had a modifier in front of it, the Dark Knight, well, this might be somebody who's trying to do good, but there is something about him that is not quite all light and good. It is, to use D&D terminology, I suppose it would be chaotic lawful, or because he's certainly not full on lawful good.
See, my argument for Batman, if you want to talk about in D&D, I wouldn't even put him on lawful because he is by definition breaking the law.
Okay.
He's a vigilante. Batman is chaotic good because for all the damage and nastiness that he can inflict, it's always to the betterment of mankind. And I think that touchstone is that he is in fact a hero.
Yeah,
Batman, no matter what else he is a good guy. He's a hero. He's there to make, at the core of his premise, he is there to make sure that the thing that happened to him, where he was orphaned at 8 years old by a man with a gun, happens to no one else. That is what is at the core of Batman. It is why I always go back to the can you see this man comforting a crying child successfully?
Yeah.
And to talk about adaptations where he has done that, in fact, is more or less the epitome of his character, we can look no further than the best version of Batman, if you ask me, the animated series.
Okay.
Because there is a whole episode where he is comforting Dick Grayson. And Ken Conroy is the voice of Batman to a lot of people, especially me. And I think that's where I tend to go when I want to talk about accurate representation, because it is subjective. I argue. I know I got up on my soapbox and I get very angry about Snyderverse and I don't like it, but I can respect that there are people who that will be their favorite Batman. I've never met those people, but I can imagine they exist. I'd be surprised, but
I mean, you raise that good point of it being subjective, and it very certainly is. One of the things we need to sort of consider, I suppose, is that we need to envisage a world where the first exposure to Batman as a character, as an actual, like, not just through pop culture imagery, not just through tangentially seeing the Batman logo on your shirt, for example, but actually seeing a played out version of Batman. We need to consider a world where Snyder's Batman is the only Batman some people have actually watched. And to that person, is that who Batman would become? Is that how their idea of Batman would be? I mean, as a writer, we owe ourselves we owe it to sort of ask that question. If because I do it all the time with adaptation. My adaptation could be the first time anybody has ever come across these characters, and as I do adaptations in schools, often it's the first time these kids have come across these characters. So if you phrase it in that kind of mindset, the first time a person may have come across a physicalized version of Batman, maybe that Zack Snyder movie.
I must admit, I think in this particular case, that might be a little bit disingenuous.
How so?
Because if you think that's not just like, oh yeah, it's I mean, you know how I subscribe to the idea that all things are possible. I genuinely don't think that is, because at the same time, but okay, that might be the first physical interpretation you see of Batman. Yeah, but by this time, around the same time, they were bringing out Lego Batman. And then you've got to go, if you've got to the age of the point where you can decide to watch what you watch, you get to choose what you're watching. By the way that our culture is, you will have seen Batman. It's like saying you've never seen an egg before. You're going to have. Not unless you have actively avoided it, and therefore you know who Batman is to avoid him. I don't think it really applies to this particular topic. I think it's too broad a thing in our world for us to do. I can see where you're driving at. What if, because for other interpretations, like first time I saw Christmas Carol, for example, was the Muppets Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
And that was what the Christmas Carol was for me until I found out, oh, wait, it's something else. Oh, okay, cool. I can see where you're driving at. But I only think it works with media that isn't literally everywhere. Because I learned about Batman by the age of 5. I played Batman as a kid. It was introduced to me by my parents. It was just there. When it comes to adaptations of things that are just there, I don't think you can really go with like the most recent, because my first introduction to Batman actually was Adam West, because my mum put it on. I don't know. I don't think it's. I can understand the idea that, well, would that be Batman to that person? Yes, but that person would also have. I can't agree that would ever be a situation. If you know what I mean.
No, I mean,
not with something as big as Batman.
Well, I mean, you raised the idea that, like, Lego Batman, for example, and Batman as a character appears in the Lego movie. Yeah. You know, we even, and if we take a moment to pause on that, we even see the kind of, I suppose, in geeky joke that appears with, you know, Superman not really wanting to spend much time with Green Lantern. Can he just, you know, get lost already? We see that played out in the Lego movie. We see certain elements of the of Batman there, but we don't see everything about him, kind of thing. You know, we see everything's got to be edgy and everything's got to be dark. And I mean, there's a good deal of that being poked fun at within the movie. And I'm talking about the Lego movie, not the Lego Batman movie.
I know.
But even so. So, yeah, you're completely right. So what, if you could take an overview of all of the versions of Batman that are good, what elements would you say are, what are the most common themes then you think that, so if somebody was to write another version of Batman, what elements from what different places would you pick on and go, well, these are what I should use?
Okay, if I was told by someone in my wildest fantasy, right, Dave, we want you to write or film or make a Batman thing. The first properties I would go to for how I wanted to frame Batman, and what kind of characterization I wanted to go from, what I thought would be the definitive for me, at least, I'd go to the animated series. I would go to, actually, funnily enough, I would go to Young Justice, and I'd pick Batman from there. And I would also go to, I'm going to get flack for this.
Go for it. Tell me.
I would go for Val Kilmer's Batman in Batman Forever.
So let me ask you then, given that Batman's origin is in comics, why didn't you pick a Batman comic? Or a particular Batman series of comics, because they tend to appear in series after all.
They do. The reason is because I think Batman stopped so much being a comic book character as you first interact with him a long time ago. I think he became a cultural touchstone. And also, to be quite honest with you, comics are so convoluted
Mm.
But if you pick any element from Batman, I mean, my favorite Batman comic ever is actually quite funny because Batman's not really in it.
Mm.
My favorite Batman comic is, if you forgive me, I'm gonna go for a deep pull on this one. Is Batman Battle for the Cowl, which deals with, which rather amusingly, oh no, it's not this one, it's another one. I have a Neil Gaiman comic, which I didn't realize was done by
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman. I think it's Whatever Happened to the Cape Crusader.
Yeah.
But anyway, and I think the reason that I don't pick for comics so much is because if I had to do a comic book adaptation straight from a comic book movie, I wouldn't do a story about Batman. That's why I didn't pick any of the comics. I'd go for his family. I'd do a Bat family movie. That's what I'd do. So that's, if you wanted just a Batman story, I'd go to where he's already been adapted and where it's already more fine-tuned and there's a more broad idea of his character. Because as much as I like other properties with Batman in it, I find the most interesting Batman stories tend to come from visual media. Sorry, not visual media, because obviously comics are visual media, but come from television, come from
Recorded media, yeah.
recorded media, because it just resonates with me more personally. Because I can read a Batman comic and go, I don't like this Batman comic, go away. And then the next one, he can be, depending on the writer, a completely different character. Whereas in a TV series, in a film series, TV series more I find than with Batman, because the actor keeps changing for films. You get a better feel of the character, so there's more to draw from when you want to make your own. Because as much as you can have, you can pull a lot from Batman's character in his comics, as you say, there's been so many different runs on the character, so many different artistic takes on the character, that you can lose the characterization pretty quickly. I mean, Batman in one comic can be a very, very cold and almost Machiavellian character. And then in another character, he can be the warmest, biggest dad figure who just happens to also run around Gotham streets and beat up, bad guys. It's a much broader thing. And I would go for those three because I feel they're much more how he is perceived by the public. If I was looking at it from a mass appeal, I would go to the adaptations that more people have seen, because that's more likely to get the same idea of people's opinion of Batman, and it would get my work looked at more.
Do you think, though, that could lead you up the wrong kind of road? So I'm thinking, we've talked about Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
And Sherlock Holmes is a character that undeniably people know about just in the ether.
Oh yeah,
I knew
about Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. If we go to the BBC series by Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat,
yes,
we've talked about how the Sherlock Holmes who appears in that version is not a genius of deductive reasoning.
No,
he makes he comes to his conclusions almost by magic, by observing things that the ordinary mortal can't. Whereas if you look at Conan Doyle's work and what is written down there, if you are reading every single detail and you pick up on the same details that the character of Sherlock Holmes picks up on, you can solve the mystery in the same way that Sherlock Holmes does through deductive reasoning. So in that, Sherlock, the TV series, the BBC TV series, is undoubtedly a popular and very well-received TV show. However, I would argue it's a really, really poor version of the character of Sherlock Holmes because it fails on the deductive reasoning thing. I said this as we've been talking before. He solves crimes by magic more than he does by deductive reasoning.
Well, yeah, I think that's quite true, because I mean that's I think that might be part of the reason why I like those adaptations of Batman. It focuses more on his detectiveness, which is what he's well known for. Because you could argue that Sherlock Holmes in the TV show Sherlock, he's more of a superhero than a detective. His noticing things isn't so much detective skill, it's, oh, I notice that because I'm Sherlock Holmes and that's what I do. It's a superpower. But yeah, it's it could lead you down the wrong path. And indeed, I think, in fairness, if you come at Batman in a certain way, or any character with a certain mindset, and you just focus on what you want to do,
Hmm.
you can go down a very individual path that could be wrong for most people. It comes down to what you want to do with it. I mean, Batman, like Zack Snyder's interpretation of Batman, very much comes from his own personal opinions, and as would mine. But I get the feeling that, not to cast aspersions on Mr. Snyder, because obviously I don't know the man, I think it came from a less. I'm trying to think of the right word. I think it came from a more personal than necessarily it should have, for something that you want to put out to a massive audience.
Do you think then that's a failure of Snyder as an adapter? Because
I think so.
From my perspective, what I've spent a good deal of my writing career doing is adaptation. And my personal argument is that even when you are fictionalizing certain events, so I would argue the BBC TV show Upstart Crow, it borrows bits of Shakespeare's plays, it borrows tiny factoids of Shakespeare's life, it mashes them together and then kind of fictionalizes the output.
Yeah.
I would argue, though, that is an adaptation. There are some people who would say that it's metatextual or what have you. I would argue it's an adaptation because it is taking those two things and it's adapting it to suit its purpose. So as somebody who, as I say, I've spent a good deal of my life adapting, I would say that maybe it's a failure of the adapter, Zack Snyder in this case, in understanding his source material.
I think that's true, because he's also done a similar thing with Watchmen. Because Watchmen is, it's a proper Zack Snyder film. It's a really good film. I liked it. I enjoyed it when I went to see it in the cinema. I own it on DVD. I've watched it multiple times. But from my understanding, as an adaptation of Watchmen, he rather misses the point.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's not what happened with his other superhero movie, sir. That he's missed the point of a lot of how people perceive these characters. And there's no problem with deconstruction, but there's not enough meat there to deconstruct from that film.
But should we expect that for what is aimed for a mass and popular market? So thinking outside of just that section of people who like Watchmen and are familiar with it,
yeah,
Zack Snyder's job, or any writer's job, any adapter's job, and if we're talking about a new Batman movie, that Batman movie has to stand alone. Like Batman Begins had to start from scratch.
Yeah.
Now, I realize, though, what I'm about to say, I can undermine in about 30 seconds' time.
So could I, probably. Go on.
But there is that job of the adapter of, as I said before, you are introducing this character first time round. Now, I say this being fully aware that Marvel, on the other hand, made a very different choice. That Spider-Man, is it Homecoming, was the first of the new ones, did something that no other superhero movie has done, no other superhero sort of reboot has done up till now. It assumed that everybody was familiar with how Spider-Man came to be and started after the origin story. It did away with the origin story. Now, to me, that alone, the confidence of the person who penned that script, adapted that property, the confidence in their audience impresses me greatly. And as an adapter myself, I am in awe of that decision and how well it played out, because that, like, I would never have thought that would have happened, but the fact it did and was so popular is immense. Do you think the same is possible to do with Batman?
Yes, because here's the thing. In Homecoming, actually, it's not even in. Yeah, no, it is in Homecoming. Homecoming hits one line, and if you know Spider-Man at all, you know what he's referencing, and that is your origin. You know it's happened. You know it's already happened. There's one line in Homecoming. There's also one in Civil War, but the one in Homecoming hits me more. I can't do that again to her, not after what happened. I'm paraphrasing roughly because I can't remember the exact line, but it is when he's talking to his best mate Ned, and he is clearly referencing that Uncle Ben has died. Now, I know Spider-Man almost as well as I know Batman, but I can guarantee you anybody with a passing understanding of Spider-Man knows who he's talking about in that sentence and what's happened.
Yeah.
And it's so everywhere that you don't need another origin movie for Peter Parker.
But you also don't need to worry about your audience not getting that reference or missing that reference. The movie stands alone even if you don't understand the origin.
Yeah, simply because of how big Spider-Man is in our culture. And I would argue that you don't need to do that. You can do that for Batman as well, because everyone knows why Batman's Batman. The actual argument could be made that you don't need an origin story because you didn't get one in the original comics until good time had passed. And I think that actually might have been something to do with no, this is why he's doing it, because it made Batman a more relatable and less just. I think it helped his PR basically, because they introduced a reason for why Batman is doing this. But it's very interesting. I think you could do it like. Case in point, in adaptations where they don't focus on Batman, but he does appear. But you say you focus on. They love to do it with Dick Grayson's Robin.
Yeah.
They reference what happened to Bruce. They reference what happened to him, but you don't necessarily have to see it.
Well, in this, I would say, I point towards the Arkham games, maybe. The Arkham games don't necessarily show his Batman's origin.
No, they don't. They reference it very, very, very heavily, especially in the first one.
Yeah,
with a very flippin' make you jump out your seat, whoa moment. Speaking from
but your starting point, if I'm remembering the right game, is Batman is escorting the Joker, which who he has just captured, through Arkham into his cell, effectively.
Yeah, and then everything goes wrong. But you start Arkham Asylum escorting Joker to Arkham Asylum, and that's all you know going in. You don't get the rest of it. So if you were just playing the game without having ever come across Batman, well, A, why, but B, just say you were, you don't need to know the origin to understand why the character's doing what he's doing. And I do think you could do that in the next Batman film. We're not going to, because from what we've learned, I think he's been at it for about a year or two. And while I don't think they're not going to focus on why he's doing this, they might not. He's been at it a year or two by now. Maybe we don't need to.
Yeah.
Or I'd be very interested to see what they're going to do. I am very aware that we've been at this for a while, and I think we should probably wrap up.
We have been. I have no doubt we will explore Batman again at some other point. Obviously,
try and stop me.
it's kind of like a long time ago when we were doing Otherworlds. I had a vague idea that we should do something to do with anime, or then we should do something to do with Studio Ghibli. And I think the problem we have is we could keep talking because it is such an extensive topic. I think, hopefully, it satisfied your itch there, Dave, as a Batman fan, to talk about at least some of the key elements of Batman. I
think it will for now. I suspect I will probably want to do another video, but it will be more like we could set up like maybe a series of this is a popular franchise. Let's talk about adaptations of it. But I think
that's a good idea.
I think it'll be fun. I mean, I could definitely do one about Batman. I could do it about other things as well, though. So that could be a fun idea we could do just for a bit of light frivolity.
Definitely. Well, we still don't have an ending, so I don't know what we're going to do to say goodbye.
Well, I think given we're talking about Batman on this video, we should probably do something a little bit. It's a shame we can't just do the typical thing where the big running joke in Batman is that Batman just disappears when he's done talking to you, even if you're continuing.